The train screeched to a halt in the middle of the snow-dusted town, its whistle echoing across the wide valley. Steam rose in heavy plumes, veiling the wooden station platform where a young woman stood, clutching an old leather suitcase. Her dress was worn but carefully pressed, her veil tucked beneath her bonnet though no groom had appeared to claim her. She held her breath each time the steam cleared, hoping for a familiar face, a hand lifted in recognition, a man who might smile and step forward. But no one came. Passengers bustled past her with hurried greetings and warm embraces, each one finding their people, leaving her more alone with every moment. The lantern light flickered across her pale cheeks, and she shifted from one boot to the other, fighting the shiver that had little to do with the cold. The letter in her coat pocket was creased from being read too many times, promises from a rancher who said he needed a wife, who vowed to be waiting. Yet the platform emptied, and her name was never called. As the last of the crowd thinned, silence spread over the station. The agent cast her a pitiful look before retreating inside. She remained, unable to make herself move, her fingers tightening around the suitcase handle as though it tethered her to hope. Her lips pressed together when the truth seeped in: she had been abandoned. Shame burned through her chest, but she swallowed it, lifting her chin against the cruel wind. She had nowhere to return, and nowhere to go forward. It was then a small tug came at her skirt. She looked down to see a little girl no older than 7, with boots scuffed from hard wear and braids undone by the snow. The child's eyes were bright and unafraid, though her cheeks were red with cold. She tilted her head up and whispered, almost like it was a secret meant only for them, "I picked you for my daddy." The young woman blinked, her lips parting as confusion mingled with the ache in her chest. "For your daddy?" she asked softly, her voice carrying both wonder and sorrow. The girl nodded with certainty. "You're the one. I told God, and he showed me." She slipped her small hand into the woman's gloved one as though it had always belonged there. Before the woman could form another word, the child tugged her toward the edge of the platform. Standing there, half shadowed in the falling snow, was a man tall and broad, his coat worn from years of hard labor. His hat was pulled low, and he carried himself with a quietness that felt heavier than the cold. His eyes, when he finally lifted them, held a guarded depth, the kind forged from too much loss. The girl called out, "Daddy, this is her. She's the one." The man's jaw tightened as he looked at the woman standing uncertainly beside his daughter. For a long, waited moment, neither spoke. The woman felt her pulse race, unsure if she had been pulled into a stranger's grief or some wild mistake. But the man stepped forward, removing his hat with slow courtesy. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low and rough, as though he didn't use it often. "My little one. She lost her mama last winter. She don't always understand what she asks for." His gaze flickered to his daughter, then back to the woman. "You don't owe us a thing. I reckon you've been waiting for someone who didn't come." The sting of those words pressed deep, but before she could reply, the child squeezed her hand tighter. "But she's ours now," the girl insisted, her tone fierce with the kind of faith only a child could hold. The man's eyes lingered on the young woman's face, seeing the veil still tucked beneath her bonnet, the suitcase she clung to, the loneliness that mirrored his own. Snow swirled between them, and something unspoken passed in that silence, two lives broken in different ways, bound suddenly by the determination of a child. He gestured toward the wagon hitched nearby. "It's a long ride out of town. If you've nowhere else to go, you can ride with us. Warm by the fire, nothing more asked of you." The woman hesitated, her heart trembling with both fear and longing. The little girl tugged again, her bright eyes never wavering. And for the first time that night, the woman felt her knees weaken, not from despair but from the fragile stirring of something she thought she had lost: belonging. She nodded faintly and let herself be led toward the waiting wagon, the snow crunching beneath their steps. The man lifted her suitcase with ease, setting it in the back before offering his hand. She took it, her fingers trembling against his strength. No vows had been spoken, no promises sealed, yet something bound them in that moment. The wagon wheels groaned as they rolled out of town, the lanterns of the station fading behind them. The child nestled against her side, humming softly to herself as though the world had already been set right. The man drove in silence, his broad shoulders straight, his eyes fixed on the dark horizon. And though the night stretched wide and uncertain before them, the young woman found her chest warming with the smallest ember of hope. She had not been claimed by the man who promised her a life. She had been chosen by a little girl who believed in miracles. And perhaps, just perhaps, that was the truest kind of beginning. The shrill cry of the train's whistle pierced the mountain air, scattering a flock of crows from the bare trees beyond the wooden station. Snow fell soft and steady, coating the roof shingles, crunching beneath hurried boots as families reunited and travelers disappeared into the lamplight of the town. The young woman stood still among them, her suitcase gripped so tightly in her hand that her knuckles burned white. The satin ribbon of her bonnet trembled against her cheek in the wind, and beneath it she had hidden a veil, folded carefully though she had no groom to meet. She had stepped off the train with her heart pounding, carrying only the letter that had kept her awake for months, a letter filled with promises. He had written that he needed her, that he had built a home on the far side of the valley, that he would be waiting on the very platform where she now stood. But the faces that rushed by her were not his. They belonged to strangers who did not call her name, who did not so much as glance her way. One by one they were claimed, leaving her rooted in place, her body rigid against the cold truth pressing down on her. By the time the station emptied, she was the only one left. The agent had given her a look of pity before closing the door against the night. She pressed her lips together, swallowing the sting in her throat. She could not cry, not here, not when she had nowhere else to go. She lifted her chin, staring down the tracks as if the answer might yet come. But the truth could no longer be denied. She had been left. A sudden tug at her skirt startled her. She looked down, and there, gazing up with a pair of earnest eyes, stood a little girl of no more than 7. Her boots were too big for her, scuffed and worn, her braids loose and dusted with snowflakes. But her cheeks were bright with life, and her small voice carried the weight of something bigger than herself. "I picked you," the girl whispered, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. The woman blinked, unsure she had heard right. "Picked me, for my daddy," the girl said with certainty. "I asked God, and he showed me you." Her small hand slipped into the woman's gloved one with confidence, as though it had always belonged there. Before the woman could answer, the girl pulled her gently forward, and that was when she saw him. He stood half in shadow at the edge of the platform, his wide-brimmed hat low over his brow, his coat heavy and weather-beaten. He was tall, built from years of work that bent men to the land, his frame broad enough to shield his daughter from the falling snow. His face was somber, worn from hardship, and when his eyes lifted to meet hers, there was a silence that seemed to still the very air between them. "Daddy," the girl said brightly, "this is her. She's the one." The man's jaw tightened. He removed his hat slowly, almost reluctantly, and nodded in her direction. "Evening," he said, his voice deep, roughened like gravel. His eyes lingered on her veil, her suitcase, the hope that still clung to her even as it cracked at the edges. He seemed to read the truth of her story without her needing to speak. "She's been waiting," the girl explained eagerly, as though to solve everything. "And we've been waiting too. So now it's right." The woman's lips parted, but words wouldn't come. Her pulse raced with confusion and a strange ache that wasn't entirely sorrow. The man's gaze softened slightly as he glanced at his daughter, then back to her. "My little one," he said quietly, "she lost her mama last winter. She don't always understand what she asks for." His voice wavered almost imperceptibly, but he steadied it. "You don't owe us a thing, miss. I reckon you've been wrong tonight, and I'm sorry for it." The child tugged harder on her hand, stubborn and certain. "But she's ours now. God picked her. The man closed his eyes for a moment, as though bearing the weight of something heavy. Then he looked to the young woman again. It's a long ride back to the ranch. If you've no place to go tonight, you can come with us. Warmth, food, nothing more asked of you. Only until you find where you mean to be. Her throat tightened. She had nowhere. Not anymore. The idea of shelter, even for a night, was more mercy than she had expected to find in this cold place. She searched his face for cruelty but found only a quiet weariness, and something buried deeper, a loneliness that mirrored her own. The girl's hand squeezed hers with fierce conviction, and for the first time, the woman felt the fragile stirring of belonging. She nodded, her voice barely more than breath. Thank you. The man carried her suitcase to the wagon, setting it down with an ease that belied his strength. He offered his hand to help her climb up, and when their fingers touched, she felt the warmth of his calloused palm. She settled beside the child, who leaned into her as though she had been there forever. The wagon wheels creaked and groaned as the horses pulled them out of town. The lanterns of the station glowed dimly behind them, then vanished altogether. Snow fell thicker now, softening the world into silence. The man drove steadily, his broad shoulders set, his eyes fixed on the road stretching into darkness. The child hummed softly, her head resting against the woman's arm. And as the night wrapped around them, the woman realized her journey had not ended at that empty platform. It had only just begun. The wagon rolled steadily over the frozen ground, the horse's breath puffing white clouds into the night air. The woman sat with her hands folded in her lap, her suitcase rattling against the boards behind her, her bonnet still pulled low as though it might shield her from the truth of her own life. The child leaned close, her warmth a small but steady comfort, while the man at the reins kept his silence, save for the soft commands he murmured to the team. The road wound between dark stands of pines, their branches heavy with snow. The stars glinted sharp and bright above, as if the heavens themselves leaned close to watch. It was a long while before the woman spoke, her voice careful in the stillness. You live far from town. The man nodded, eyes fixed ahead. A good hour's ride yet. Out by the foothills, nearest neighbors another mile beyond that. He paused, his voice low, steady. It ain't much, but it keeps us. The girl stirred, tilting her face up toward the woman. We have a big stove, and Daddy makes the best cornbread. You'll see. She smiled as though nothing in the world could be more certain. The woman's throat tightened. She smoothed the child's hair gently, the simple act bringing with it an ache she hadn't expected. No one had ever clung to her so quickly, with such unshakable faith. The wagon creaked on until at last the dark shape of a house came into view, a ranch built plain but strong, its roof heavy with snow. A lantern burned faintly in the window, a beacon against the wide emptiness of the land. The man pulled the horses to a stop and climbed down, his boots crunching on the frosted earth. He lifted the child first, then offered his hand to the woman. She hesitated only a moment before taking it, his grip steady, grounding her in this strange new world. Inside, the house smelled faintly of wood smoke and sage. The walls were plain pine, the furniture simple but well worn, carrying the shape of a life lived in toil and quiet endurance. A fire burned low in the stove, casting flickering light across the room. Sit, the man said, his voice more command than request, though not unkind. He set about stoking the fire, the flames leaping higher under his sure hands. The girl busied herself with setting plates on the table, humming under her breath. The woman sat stiffly, her suitcase by her feet, her bonnet resting in her lap. She felt the weight of exhaustion sink into her bones now that warmth surrounded her. For a long time she watched the man move about the house, his deliberate motions, his silence, the careful way he tended to every task. He was not a man given to easy words, but every movement spoke of responsibility that had pressed down on him since the day loss had entered his home. When at last the cornbread was set out, its crust golden and fragrant, the three of them sat together. The girl spoke freely, filling the room with her chatter, stories of school, of the horse she claimed was hers, of the kitten that had taken to sleeping in her bed. The man listened, offering only small grunts of acknowledgement, while the woman answered softly, drawn into the simple rhythm of their life. After supper, the girl curled against the woman on the worn sofa, her eyelids heavy. "You'll stay," she murmured drowsily, her small hand tightening around the woman's sleeve. "God picked you for us." The woman brushed the child's hair back gently, her heart aching with a tenderness she hadn't thought herself capable of feeling. "Rest, little one," she whispered, though she could not promise what tomorrow might bring. When the child had been carried off to bed, the woman found herself alone with the man by the fire. Silence stretched long between them, filled only by the pop of burning wood. At last she spoke, her voice low. "I should explain," she said. "There was a man who wrote to me. Promised he'd meet me at the station, promised a home. But he never came. I don't know if he changed his mind, or if the letter was nothing more than empty words. All I know is that I've nowhere else to go." The man listened, his expression unreadable, though his eyes flickered with something like understanding. He nodded slowly. "The world's full of promises that don't hold," he said. "I know that truth too well." His gaze shifted toward the small bedroom where his daughter slept. "But she don't. She still believes. And she's the only reason I keep on." The woman lowered her eyes, her hands clasped tight in her lap. "I don't wish to bring trouble on you. If I'm only a burden, I'll be gone by morning." He shook his head, leaning back in his chair. "Ain't no burden to feed one more plate. And if my little girl sees something in you, well, maybe I'd be a fool not to let her keep it a while." His voice softened, almost against his will. "You're welcome to stay, for as long as you need." Days turned into weeks, and the woman found herself drawn deeper into the rhythm of the ranch. She rose early with the dawn, her hands finding work without needing to be asked, kneading bread, mending clothes, tending the fire. The child shadowed her at every turn, filling the rooms with laughter that had been absent too long. And though the man remained guarded, his silence softened little by little. He began to ask her thoughts, to leave small tasks in her care, to watch her with an expression that spoke of questions he did not voice. One evening, as winter slowly gave way to the first hints of thaw, the three of them sat together watching the fire burn low. The girl leaned against her father, then turned her sleepy eyes toward the woman. "See," she murmured with the certainty of a prophet. "I told you God picked her. She's ours." The man met the woman's gaze over the child's head. For the first time, he did not look away. His eyes held hers, steady, unflinching, as though he had finally allowed himself to see what had been there all along. No vows had been spoken. No ceremony had bound them. And yet, in that quiet moment, something stronger than promises wove between them. A bond born of loss, of faith, of a child's unshakable belief that love could be chosen, even out of ashes. The woman reached across the space between them, laying her hand over his. His fingers curled around hers slowly, with the weight of a man who had forgotten what it was to hope. The fire crackled, the snow melted from the eaves, and in the stillness of that night, a new life began. Not claimed by any letter, but chosen by a little girl who believed in miracles, and sealed by two hearts that had finally found their way home.